Welcome to Misfits and Mystics podcast, where we have conversations intersecting faith, mental health, artistry, and social justice. We're so glad you're here. So get cozy.
But not too cozy, because we do keep it real on this podcast.
Listen with care.
And enjoy.
Well, guys, today is a special day because I have with me the beloved Whitney Gaston.
Hello.
Hello. Whitney's being FaceTimed in. Alicia is stuck in the city. And so we have Whitney here to fill in for her. Welcome back.
Thanks. I'm excited.
I'm super excited. Because this month we kick off a brand new series that I've been wanting to do, but was kind of afraid to do in the beginning. But now we've warmed up a little and I'm ready to talk about this. So this whole entire month we're going to be talking about sex. Sex.
That makes me think of that Jennings song. S-E-X.
Right.
Throwback.
Yes, throwback. I always think about let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Right. Yep, that's the one. So, yes, the entire month we're going to be talking about sex, and part of what makes us misfits is our willingness to talk about things that are taboo or approach topics from a lens that defies the norm or challenges constructs, and sex is definitely one of those topics that people tend to shy away from, especially in public spaces or platforms. And then if you do talk about it, it's seen as, inappropriate, automatically labeled as mature content, or the conversation is centered around a controlled narrative, often perpetuating ignorance and harm. So one of the major goals of this series is to simply normalize talking about sex and hopefully opening up the dialogue to help inform us along the way. And I just want to put a disclaimer, and I'll probably say this every week. None of us on here, well, at least this week, are experts. We're not doctors or mental health professionals or sex professionals in any way. We're just speaking from experience, our own personal research, and life. So just take what is said how you need to, and if you need additional support, I totally encourage you to do that. But we're going to get into it. So sex is part of the human experience, and since we are humans, we're going to talk about it. And there's so many things that we could talk about with sex. But we're just going to do a little overview this week and kind of introduce the whole series and just talk about what is sex? What is it? How do we view sex? How do our values inform our sexual ethic? And what are we discovering about sex? What is missing from the conversation around sex? Just all the things. Nothing is really off limits unless we, don't want it to be. And we also encourage you, the listeners, to listen with care, as sometimes things might come up that may be triggering. But we, we're going to do our best to have this conversation and hopefully have a little fun doing it. So, Whitney, how was sex introduced to you? How was it discussed growing up?
It wasn't really, which is crazy. I mean, of course, you have the talk, um, whatever that is for people. I feel like with my family, it was very okay. You're a girl. You're gonna have a period. Um, Please wait to have sex until marriage, and if you don't, be safe. It wasn't really anything more than that. Um, and so growing up, I just kind of was hush hush about it, even though a lot of my friends were sexually active when we were younger.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I wouldn't say I was a late bloomer, but I mean later than a lot of my friends that I was surrounded with. So yeah, because I waited till I was like 18. So um, and I intended on waiting for the person I felt right losing it to.
Mm.
Losing it, meaning the myth that is virginity.
Yeah, and we're
But
gonna talk more about that.
yeah, so we didn't really talk about sex in my household, and we don't talk about it now that we're grown either.
Hmm.
My family is like, I would talk about it, but my family's like, my parents in particular are just a little prudish, just a little bit. So
Yeah. So then, how did you get to a place where you were comfortable talking about sex, even though your family isn't?
mm. Honestly, I feel like it came with an experience. And the more experience that I've had and the more talking about it that I've done, it's been like a therapy for me, honestly, and made me feel more liberated sexually and being able to say what I find pleasurable for myself.
Mm.
Um, so it's still a process. I don't feel like it's something that I've completely become comfortable within, but um, and maybe let me rephrase that. Let me say I am very comfortable talking about sex and sexuality and everything that it encompasses, but I'm still discovering things about myself sexually.
Mm-hmm.
So, in order to find those things out, I feel like I do have to have the conversation. So, I remember a big turning point was a relationship that I was in for like 4 years and like having conversations about our insecurities and things. And when you're with somebody for that long, you got to have conversations about it, or like you'll hit a dead end, or miscommunications about physical intimacy can be harming to the emotions and other cores of the relationship. So I think being with her, I became more comfortable in talking about it with everyone. Um, so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I sex was discussed, but like you were saying, kind of more in the narrative of like this is the basics of what it is, this is you're assigned female, so this is what encompasses all of that with your sexual reproductive organs and
Mm-hmm.
getting a period and hygiene and all that. My parents were nurses, so I feel like sex was discussed very much from a medical, scientific point of view. My father gave me the talk, and he just, I think I was maybe 7 or 8, and he had these, like science, medical books in the house, and there was
Yeah.
one that uh, I used to flip through, and it just talked about the human body. And there was a chapter on, sex or whatever. And he just flipped through it because it had a lot of pictures. So it was easy for him to explain, I guess. And he basically was just like, yeah, it was very much explained from a very heteronormative point of view, like the penis inserts the vagina, and
Uh-huh.
then from there, these are the possibilities that can happen. So if the female is ovulating, then the sperm like swims up and enters into the egg and creates a child, and it was very much centered around procreation, I feel like. But my dad he was also like, you can ask me anything. So he was a little bit open about like sex as a pleasurable act. So explaining that not everybody is having sex just to procreate, but it also
Mm.
like feels good. But I don't think he used necessarily the language that I'm using now. Like, it feels good. I can't remember if we talked about orgasms or anything like that. But it was just sort of understood that there are people that are just having sex because it feels good.
Yeah.
And I remember asking him about sex with like I guess like gay sex or lesbian sex, because I knew that it was possible for people of the same gender to have sex, but I was curious to know like what that really encompassed and like what that meant, and I wanted to know what he thought about it. And so that's when the like theological conversation came up, because my dad is also a preacher.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I think that's like my first memory of it being like this confirmation of like sex between two men or two women is not ideal or is wrong
Mm-hmm.
or is not within God's plan. And I'm saying this in air quotes. Um, and I think at that time, I didn't necessarily know that I was queer, but I like knew. I think there was like a little inkling within me that knew that like, oh, I was different. I just didn't have the understanding or the language to articulate what that was yet. And so hearing that from him, it kind of arose this like fear. Because I think I knew at that age that I was like interested, like in sex, I guess, but but not really. I don't know. It was just like an inner knowing. So that was my first like memory of sex, like the sex talk with my parents. But in general, like sex was always presented to me as a child as like something that's inappropriate or mature, like this is for adult eyes only. um Something seen as gross or nasty, like among like children, like we were conditioned to be like, oh, if you are sexual in any way, you're nasty or you're gross. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of shame around it. But it was weird because it's like, oh, when you become an adult, then it won't be shameful anymore. But now that I'm an adult, I'm still working through
Yeah.
the shame that you're like conditioned to feel. And then just like a lot of misinformation. Like people
Yeah.
just like not trained on how to talk about it. So people just like pass down like what they were taught, even though it might not have been completely accurate.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that, let's talk about misinformation.
Ooh.
Ooh. Um, what what are some things that people said to you about sex, or just general things that we heard or are continuing to hear in society about sex that isn't necessarily accurate or doesn't necessarily describe our understanding of sex or our experience of sex?
Hmm. Um, Honestly, I feel like the most confusing part of sex to me, even now, is the freaking anatomy, like the G spot and all that other stuff. Like, I feel like I'm just now starting to find mine,
Mm-hmm.
and like, just like one of those things that when you do understand your body, it changes every freaking thing.
Yeah.
I feel like even in like sex ed classes, like now, sex education is something that is starting to be removed from schools, which is really horrible. But like sex ed when I was in school really wasn't great either. So
No, it
it's
wasn't.
like it was awful.
So
I feel
bad.
like yeah, I feel like it was like here's how to put a condom on. That was like it.
Mm-hmm.
Like and so I think really mine just comes from uh, the anatomy perspective of it. I don't really think I was told much about sex other than um, I remember it being really vaguely spoken to me about how you change after a sexual experience with someone.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't realize how much emotional weight um, sex would carry, and I think that varies for different people. For me, being now that I do identify as demisexual, now I understand why I would feel the way that I felt, um, and I would equate sex with love because to me that was me showing you an act of love. Like for me, this is what this means, but it wasn't always the same for the other person.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. I also didn't realize that. I think this comes with maturity. I didn't realize that I was able to say to my partner, "Hey, I didn't like that,"
Yeah.
or "Hey, what if we try this?"
Mm-hmm.
Um, Seeking my own pleasure in addition to theirs
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
is just now becoming a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm late to the party, but I'm here.
Listen, a lot of people still haven't arrived to the party, so um,
Yeah.
and it's a given because, like we were saying, we didn't have the information that we have now. Because with the sex education part, like it was pretty basic, but it was very much rooted around a specific narrative that only includes a portion of people. And everybody's different. Everybody identifies in different ways. Everybody is different,
Everybody.
you know? And with those different bodies comes different needs and desires. And I think, yeah, for me, a lot of the misinformation was about like the when you have sex, everything changes.
Uh-huh.
Because sex was, for me, growing up in a Christian household, it was very much about like man and woman become one flesh, you know?
Oh,
And sex is like is an act of that becoming a reality, I guess.
yeah.
And it it was very much rooted in the sense that like yes, sex is for procreation, and then any pleasure that comes with sex, like the only good pleasure with sex is should be between two people
Man and
that
wife.
are married. Yeah, a man
Mm-hmm.
and a woman who are married, and all other sex is not as satisfying. Like I think that was a trick that a lot of churches did and still do. This narrative of like there's no greater sex than between you and your spouse, and that sex is holy and wonderful and beautiful when it's with your spouse. But
Uh-huh.
it if it's not with your spouse, and it's not heterosex, penis, vagina that leads to children, then any pleasure that you're experiencing is a trick of the devil, um, or is a way to fill a void that only the Lord can fill. I'm triggered, you're triggered, everybody's triggered right now. So, um, yeah. And when I had sex with another person, I realized that yes, it changed me in the sense that, like, oh, I experienced something new. Like, I experienced something for the first time. And I think anytime you experience something for the first time, it does change you, it does transform you, it teaches you something about yourself and others and the world in which you live. Sex.
Yeah, like the first time I had like Jenny's ice cream or something.
Right. Mind blown, you know?
Right.
So
Like,
sex is like no exception to that. I don't know why we like place sex as like this this ultimate thing. Like it is. I do believe that sex can be a sacred act, and one should be very mindful when engaging in sex, especially when engaging in any sort of sexual activity with other people, because you want to be safe, you want to be considerate of others and yourself. But it's an experience, it's an act, and it's a human experience. And just like all human experiences, we're learning and growing and changing and evolving. And whether you have sex with one person forever, or you have sex with multiple people over time, or you have sex with multiple people at the same time, I don't know.
right.
It's an experience, and I feel like we are so concerned about putting sex in a box. And like I'm like looking through my notes or whatever, and when I think about misinformation, I think about three basic tenets, at least in my experience. That one, the reason why we're misinformed is because as a society in general, we aren't taught about basic functions of the body, like you said.
Yeah.
So that creates a lack of understanding of our sexual desires, our basic needs, what's happening, in the body.
Yeah.
And I think two of the major reasons for that is religion. So the church, I believe, then and now, is ill-equipped to teach us about sex because it's so caught up in the dogma of maintaining control, maintaining constructs, and status quos, instead of being open and inclusive and being more rooted in providing options that are safe and fulfilling for people. But instead it's like, oh, there's only one way, there's only one model to have a healthy sex life. And if you don't fit into our box and our model, you don't get the keys to the information that you need. And then on the flip side to that, so you have the like sacred world, and then you have the secular world, who's just as guilty, that is not equipped to teach us, because schools and other settings that can provide education, they submit too much to parental, societal ignorance instead of modeling learning. So like you were saying, sex ed in schools are going away, or they're not as comprehensive as they could be.
Right.
That's because like we're so concerned with like fitting this narrative. And then I'll also say, like, this is very cliche to say, but all of this encompasses as a result of supremacy culture and the patriarchy. And I
Uh-huh.
know those are like two hot buzzwords that people are probably sick of hearing, but
Call a spade a spade.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. And when I say the patriarchy, that's not me attacking men. I'm attacking a system that elevates a supremacy culture that favors cis men.
Uh-huh.
It puts them in a place of privilege, but even in the sense that they may be privileged in a lot of ways, I do believe that the like patriarchal supremacy culture also harms cis men as well, because they also are secluded to this box of expectations, and they also don't get to explore their sexuality and desires in a healthy way, which is why I think a lot of cis men are perpetuating harm and using sex in that way because they're not given the
Yeah.
freedom to explore sex.
Yeah.
It's contained, it's controlled. And what do you do when, like, what do you do when somebody says don't touch that, don't do that? You want to go do it.
Yeah.
And when people
Yeah.
don't provide you with like, well, here's a safe way to explore this, or here's a good foundational reason why you maybe shouldn't explore this at this time or in this way, it's just like, don't do it. And as humans, we're going to be like, ooh, I'm curious. What would happen
Yeah.
if I did that? And it results in people, um, causing harm to others and themselves,
Uh-huh.
unfortunately. So, yeah. I don't know. I don't know what you think about that, but.
No, I definitely agree with you. Um, and that can go into so much more because I literally was talking to someone last night about consent
Mm-hmm.
because there's more misinformation, like what consent consists of. Because um, he was coming from a place of like, well, sometimes there's consent that's not verbal,
Mm-hmm.
which is also very, and I feel like as a woman, in my experience, I have not had to worry about that because usually, um, even if I'm with a woman or a male or whoever I'm with, like, um, is generally the more of the aggressor than I am. So for me, I haven't really noticed like anything that wasn't consensual or had to worry about that per se.
Mm-hmm.
It was clear, but even, I mean, thinking about that, like, consent could be a yes, but also someone not consenting doesn't necessarily have to be a no.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So, mm, that's something that I'm like thinking about at this point. Like, just like, damn, I've never really had to, like, other than me telling somebody no, because I will be blatant, I will say it. I haven't had to think about it on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Consent is tricky, and I think consent goes beyond sex. It's the
for
principle.
everything.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
the principle of consent that isn't being addressed, and unfortunately, it bleeds over into sex because the conversation around sex is already in a vulnerable spot because, like we've been saying, people don't talk about it, or if they do talk about it, it's very like just not good.
yeah,
Or people are hesitant. Yeah, and so there's like a lack of authenticity and honesty that goes into a lot of conversations about sex. And because it's also seen as something that, you know, is not for children, to talk about. Um, like you were saying, like I'm late to the party. I think we just assume like, oh, when we become adults, we'll just like know about it because sex is natural. But yeah, there's a lot of things that are natural, but we still need guidance and understanding and education around it to help us flourish in those natural experiences. So, yeah, I definitely can see where consent or lack thereof a lot of times plays a role in, our experiences and development. Um, but I wanted to dive into like the sex education part, which I know we kind of brought up earlier. Because I know for me, sex education, like I said, I had sex ed in school. I didn't really hear much about sex at all in church or any other like spaces other than school and home. And so I'm wondering what was sex ed like for you in school? What did they talk about? What was the focus? And like what do you want to see? What would have been helpful for you, I guess, that wasn't present in sex ed when you were younger?
I literally remember sex ed class being a part of PE, I guess.
What?
Which is weird. Yes, in middle school, they put that like in our PE, like, which makes no freaking sense, right? Like what? And it was like we would go in like I guess shifts, so like all of the eighth grade would go to like gym and stuff, but like we'd be split up in different groups. So it's like your group would get like 1 week of sex ed.
Hmm.
And it was literally just like videos about periods and like about like it's like they leave sex education, at least in my opinion, they left sex education to like the football coaches who really don't have anything to teach. They're really just there to coach, but you got to teach to work here, so this is what we're going to give you. I don't feel like it was handled with care at all, like um and it was just more of a moment for people to just be immature and laugh about shit than like really for us to learn anything. Like,
Yeah. So was this middle school or high school?
yeah, middle school.
Okay.
In high school, I didn't have any sex ed at all.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
Wow.
Like none. I had a health teacher that like kind of touched on it some, but um, no, no sex ed at all. Like ninth through 12th grade. Everything that I learned was on my own.
Yeah, see, when you were saying PE, because I didn't have any sex ed in middle school.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there may have been some mention about um, just basic development, like sexual development in the sense of this is what happens during puberty, and I think there was some sort of conversation about that, but it was in the context of science class. So when we get to the like biology part and we start talking about the human body, there may have been some talk about that. But then in high school, I had to take a wellness health class. But that was just all encompassing of various topics like, you know, I remember there was a unit on drugs, there was a unit on alcohol abuse, I got certified, CPR certified through that class. Um, just various topics, and surprisingly, there was a little bit of mention of mental health one time,
Oh
and that
wow.
was because we would have guest speakers come on Friday. It
Mhm.
was either we had a guest speaker on Friday, or we combined with the PE class and was given like a open like gym period, which none of us in wellness like actually like participated in gym. We would just like sit and do our homework. So it was kind of like a study hall for us. And I went to an art school, as you know, so like
Yeah.
we didn't even really study either. Like I have so many videos of us like making up dances and like practicing monologues and shit. But like um yeah, so there was like one guest speaker that talked about grief.
Oh.
But other than that, it was just sort of like very surface. And so one of the guest speakers, came to have the sex talk with us, and that's when I learned a little bit of things like, this is how you put on a condom, this is what a condom looks like, and
Mhm.
um conversations about like sex, like what is considered sex. So sex isn't just intercourse, but there's also oral sex and digital sex and
Yeah.
anal sex, and like there was a little bit of mention of like same sex relations, but not really. Um, and if it was, I feel like it was very centered around like men.
Mhm.
And it kind of centered around this narrative of like gay men are more likely to contract HIV, so make
Mhm.
sure you're being safe if you have anal sex. But there was no mention of like how to girls get it on,
No, seriously.
um, and it was very much assumed, coming from the assumption that most of us were straight and engaging in, or were going to engage in sex that was very like heteronormative. So that's what the education was, heteronormative. um,
Of course.
and it was also very fear based. Like it was that you'll get pregnant and die trope.
Yeah.
There was so much focus on the
I was afraid of.
consequences. Yeah.
Yeah, I was afraid of my first time. I was afraid of. I literally thought I was gonna die or just like get pregnant.
Yeah. Or get a disease, like you're gonna get a disease. I feel like that was the bulk of my sex education in high school, was like about STIs and learning about all the different kinds that you could get, like and it was like on the test, like name like symptoms of gonorrhea, and what's the difference between herpes and like what is herpes classified as versus HIV or AIDS, like there's varying levels of sexually transmitted infections. And yeah, so it did kind of create this thought that like sex is scary, sex is risky, sex is dirty, and only like if you're engaging in sex, especially as a young person, like a teenager or young adult, you are you are being rebellious, you are defying like what is supposed to be happening.
Right.
And I think it fed this idea in my head as someone who was always kind of like the good girl, the goody two shoes, the preacher's kid, the little kid that did everything right. It kind of elevated something in me to where like sex was a way to disprove my purity. or my goodness. So I was very adamant on staying abstinent, you know, because that was also a thing too. Like, abstinence is the safest form of sex, which
Yeah.
I guess is true. Like, if you're not doing it, then nothing
Can happen to you.
nothing can happen. But if you're not doing it and you want to be doing it, but you're just allowing fear to stop you, then you're like missing out, right?
Right.
Um yeah, I missed out. And
Me too.
I'm not saying that I regret my decision to remain abstinent when I was, especially when I was a teenager, because there's so many um emotions and like hormones that are happening
Hmm.
at that age that if you're not having conversations and really, you know, informed, I guess having sex at a young age can have a set of consequences that aren't just rooted around like the potential of getting pregnant or the potential of getting an STI, but like you were saying earlier, like, you know, like equating the act of sex with love and having to navigate
Yeah.
all these different emotions that maybe you're not ready for at that age. But I definitely think as I grew into an adult, I definitely missed out on a lot because I was just so concerned about the image, you know, maintaining an image, maintaining purity, because, you know, that's that's how sex was presented, like a measurement of how good and pure you are. um
Right.
so yeah, I I just feel like now that I look now that I've evolved so much, like as a person and in my beliefs and my values even, well, I guess my values haven't really changed, but how that plays out has evolved. Um, but I just feel like if sex ed were truly comprehensive, like it should be,
Hmm.
I think it would force us to address some truths that challenge constructs. Like, sex can and does occur outside of marriage.
It does. Whether
uh,
they're married or not, too.
right. And I think more often than we like to think that most people's first sexual experience didn't happen within what we know as marriage. And I have my own opinions about marriage too, in the sense that, like, I don't think marriage is in the way that we know it, in the sense of like the legal agreement that happens, that
Hmm.
I don't think that
That's.
that's necessary to define your level of commitment to your
I
partner.
don't either. I don't either. I also really just think, I mean, if it's something that you want to do, cool, but of course, initially it was just used to monetize, you know, the institution of, honestly, love in general. Like, I feel like I could marry whoever I want to in this spiritual way without having to legally bind it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but then come all of the like technicalities, like if I were to get sick and like pass away, like money and all the other stuff, like who would get it, and like, just like a lot. But that's totally off the subject. But yeah, I had to
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of is on subject in the sense that I guess if you think that marriage is only supposed to be with two people of the opposite gender, and also because and we equate like all the attraction, so like if you're married then you must be romantically and sexually attracted to that person, so
Hmm.
obviously that's going to inform like your sexual ethics, you
Yeah.
know. Um, I think also it would challenge, it's going to challenge things like gender not being binary and it
Mm-hmm.
just being a social construct. Because, like I was saying, it was very centered around like male, female. I didn't know. I I think like I knew the concept of gay and a little bit of bisexuality, even though that was a shit show. There was so much bi erasure growing up.
Yeah.
um, but like the concept of trans or non binary or gender non conforming, anything on that spectrum was like not a thing. And so the type of sex education that I had definitely helped perpetuate that idea that like gender is binary and you're either there's only two categories: boy girl, man woman. And it wasn't until I got to college that I realized that that's not true, that there are multiple vast genders and ways of expressing your gender. And that gender doesn't always have to dictate attraction, and your genitals, like whatever genitals you have, doesn't have to dictate your gender or the type of sex that you are having or should be having. So, yeah. And back to the marriage thing, I think like we marriage at its core, like as a society, is simply an agreement to help quantify like the role that you're supposed to have in that person's life. Like you were saying, if I get sick or die, like this is where my resources go to. This is the person that is gonna, help make decisions for me when I'm not able to. But I'm kind of like, why does that person have to be your spouse?
Yeah. Exactly.
And it just, I think we attach the extra layers of what it means to be married, but we shouldn't like force everyone into that model. Like, so for some people marriage is a very spiritual thing and that goes beyond like the legalities that we as citizens of our country like have, but it's a covenant between people and God. For some people it really is just about like the legality of it all. Like, I just need this piece of paper to confirm that you're the person that I want, to have access to my resources. you know
Mm-hmm.
um for some it's a little bit of both, I don't know, but like when we try to force everyone into one model of like what marriage is, what marriage should look like, I just feel like it's very limiting, and it's obvious that our sex education reflects how we have limited the construct of marriage. And then like I know there are some people listening to this that are still within the realm of, or like the orthodoxy of like Christianity and other religions that have a more of a traditional view of sex and marriage. But I just want to challenge that by saying that the Bible and other sacred texts provide more ambiguity and nuance about sex than we make it out to be. And that it's possible that we attach our biases onto the text instead of embracing the mystery behind it. So, yeah. And then it's going to force us to like address the horrible reality that many have experienced some sort of sexual trauma. I feel like that wasn't
Yeah.
really talked about a lot in sex ed. Like, what happens, like, when if you're sexually abused, like, how do you deal with that? Like, what does that entail? How do you define sexual abuse or molestation or any form of act of sex that is not consensual? And that goes back to the consent thing too. Like, that was not
Yeah.
that was not a thing. Like, I'm sure rape was mentioned, but it was more of like this narrative of like, oh, there's a possibility that you might be walking down a dark road and a scary stranger is going to come up behind you and rape you and rob you. So if you don't want that to happen, you should make sure you cover up and don't be walking the streets late at night. But that's not the reality. Like, we all know now that like you're more likely to be abused or assaulted by somebody that you know, somebody that you trust, somebody that is supposed to love you, protect you, and honor you, and instead has fucked all that up. So, yeah, that's comprehensive sex ed would definitely break down those barriers for us to talk about that more, and then essentially like sex acts themselves, like not necessarily being perverted, but it's the context in which they're being performed or embodied.
Yeah.
Like, what is perversion anyway?
Yeah.
Like,
because that topic can get really sticky too. Because obviously you've had some people come out like recently that are trying to make pedophilia a sexual identity that is more acceptable.
Yeah.
Which I heard someone say that I can't remember, it was some video on YouTube, and I kept saying I just want it to be more acceptable. It's not acceptable at all, but can't make it more of any of that. But just like how people sometimes will equate that with being a member of the LGBTQ plus community.
Right.
What? Like what? And I mean, it just, I don't know, it blows my mind, honestly, quite frankly. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Makes me angry.
Yeah, because I think, well, we've definitely heard the narrative that like, oh, if gay people are acceptable, then that's going to open up all sorts of things to be acceptable. And people have said like pedophilia being one of those things. But what I have to say to that is, if you think that, bless you.
Oh, bless you.
But fuck you with love.
Yeah.
Because my sexual activity, attractions are rooted in an ethic of consent, and like
they're not harmful to anybody,
and they're not harmful to anyone. So like, I think, I don't understand where we get this idea that anything that isn't like penis, vagina, married couple sex is, there's this assumption that like once you go outside of that now you're just anything goes. And that's not true. I think it's important that also be a part of the conversation when it comes to sex education.
Yeah.
So that people...
Because the naivety of, whenever you're younger, certain things, I mean, you don't understand, you can't comprehend emotionally, and you can't tell when you're being taken advantage of. That's even true for some adults,
Mm-hmm.
because emotional maturity varies. But yeah, that definitely should be part of the discussion in sex ed. And
Yeah.
sex ed should be a requirement, and it should happen over a long period of time. I almost said periodically because I play too much, but
I knew you were gonna
it should
say that.
have. I know I can't even help it anymore. It just comes out. But it should happen over a long period of time. I think it should be recurring every year, and maybe that's just me being extra, but I don't think you can know enough.
I agree. I think it should be right up there with your math, your science,
Yeah.
your reading, because um and it kind of being a developmental thing, like, you start off in math, like learning your numbers, and then you start learning how to add and subtract, and then once you get the hang of that, you learn about multiplication and division, and then you learn about algebra and blah blah blah
And
blah.
they give us these damn,
Yeah, and
formulas and
I
shit.
think sex ed can follow that same format, of the sense of, like, you have age appropriate, developmental appropriate content for each age group or developmental stage of life, and you have to obtain that information, prove that you got it, and that you're ready to move on to the next phase of the information. There are resources out there that have, like, age appropriate content that talks about sex. Um so but I wanted to kind of jump back to the perversion thing, because I did look up the definition of perversion. And basic definition is alteration of something from its original course, meaning, or state to a distortion. So I think obviously sex was meant to be enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
and safe. So I think anything that is outside of the realm of enjoyment, outside of the realm of safety, outside of the realm of consent, is perverted.
Yeah.
Everything within that, though, that is producing good fruit in our lives is not perverted. And that's the argument that I can give, in the sense of, like, well, if you're gay or whatever, is that not the same thing as, blah blah blah? No, it's not, because my sex life, my sexual attractions are rooted in consent and safety and enjoyment among people that help me to flourish. Um, if I'm not being harmed and I'm not harming others, then it's good.
Yep.
So, um, and like, people will go like, well, that's not what God intended. How are we so arrogant to assume what God intended?
Honey. Honey. So I'll take that to the bank and cash it.
Yeah. I know I'm people are gonna be shocked hearing me say this, because I definitely was part of that camp of thinking where, it's man, woman, become one flesh. I don't think I ever truly believed that, but I really tried really hard to believe that, because I
Me too.
wanted so badly to fit in to a community that promised love and freedom and acceptance, just so long as you subscribe to everything that we're saying. And out. And I think, but I don't know. I know that there are a lot of Christians, myself included, that have different ideas and understandings of what a good, holy sexual ethic is. And that's okay. I'm down to agree to disagree. That's what makes the world go around. But I just think we can all agree that God doesn't intend for us to harm others or be harmed. And that that's how we should measure, like, what is holy versus what is perverted. And not all this other, like, nuancy shit, like,
Yeah.
that we get so caught up on. So, yes. So, with that, Whitney, what is your sexual ethic?
Oh, that's a hard question. Can you break it down for me a little more?
I guess what are so we all have a set of ethics in general. And so how would you say that your sexual ethic, is it rooted more in the sense of like how does sex play out for you? Like, is it like, do you think for you, like, is it, are you rooted in like a traditional ethic where, there's monogamy and you're only like having sex with one person at a time? Is it rooted in like, you're only having sex with people that you're in a relationship with? Or are you more open? I just, there's so many different set of ethics that you could follow. I'll go ahead and answer for me.
Yeah.
My sexual ethic is rooted, like I said, in consent, and safety. I would consider myself to be open in the sense that monogamy is not required. I am poly capable, so I I I I don't need to necessarily be in a relationship with someone to have sex with them. Um I think that sexual attraction can be separate from romantic attraction. So if I believe that, then that means that there might be someone that I'm having sex with that isn't necessarily somebody that I want to be in a relationship with. Um, because my ethic is centered around consent and pleasure. But at the same time, I'm not just out here like having sex with anybody. I think there does need to, for me, there has to be a level of like communication and trust between me and the other person, to ensure that like they're gonna honor me and I'm gonna honor them. And my sexual ethic is also rooted in communication. So, and honesty, and, ensuring that, like, if we are going to have sex, like, I want to know, like, some basic things, like, have you been tested?
Yeah.
And engaging in safe sex practices as much as possible. And being honest in the sense that, like, okay, so we're going to have sex, like, what, like, setting the boundaries of that relationship, like, from jump. So, like, if this is just a sexual relationship, let's solidify that. Versus, like, we there's other levels of attraction there, so there's potential for this relationship to not just be centered around sex. So just, keeping the lines of communication open about what we're feeling and like what that means. And knowing that and being open that things can change. Like just because we said on Tuesday, like, this is just about sex. Like I just want your sex. But then maybe on Wednesday and Thursday, like, the attraction evolves and I realize, you're I don't want you just for sex, but I enjoy your company, I enjoy your presence, I enjoy you like in other ways. Maybe if you're down, let's be open to and just like knowing that like as long as we're communicating and everybody's comfortable, then all is well. And that is so far from where my sexual ethic used to be, which it used to be very traditional. It was one person only for the rest of your life. And don't do it till there's a ring on it. And we said I do.
Yeah.
But now I am open to having sex with people outside of the realm of marriage. Sorry, mom and dad.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of the same sexual ethics. I think we have a very similar past um, mindset as well. I'm finding that I'm evolving so much sexually and just feeling really powerful within that. Um, so right now, yeah, consent and safety are big deals for me, and not even just like in a safety in a sense of like, are you getting tested, are you protected on the other stuff, but just like if there's anything at any point that I'm doing to make you feel uncomfortable, like we should be able to communicate that, because consent is consent, but it doesn't. It's not fucking everlasting gobstopper or something like that. Shit
Right.
could change, you know. So just making sure I communicate with my partner. As far as like being open to different sexual partners, I still lay a little bit more on the traditional side with that, just because of me and who I am. Being that I am demisexual, I do find it hard to have a sexual connection to someone if I do not have an emotional connection first.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I've never, yeah. And with that being said, though, I have been um, single for a while now, and so I was like exploring, um, exploring partners, and at one point, celibacy, like nothing whatsoever, like nothing. Um, just me. Self exploration too, because that's very important. Um, so recently, I started dating someone, and uh, it's funny that we talk about titles and stuff, because we literally like just had this conversation. Like, we're not like, oh, that's my girlfriend or that's my boyfriend or anything like that, but we have decided to communicate the fact that we're only dating each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only person that I'm sexually active with. And if that should change, should they want it to change, should I want it to change, that should be a conversation that we have. We also both got tested, and yeah, it's one of those things. I think communication is fucking key.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for everything, it has to be. Even the stuff that you might not be necessarily comfortable talking about, the only way to get comfortable is to allow those walls to come down and to open yourself up. Like, so I'm excited to discover, because I don't know, I will say I will be open and honest and say that I like. It's funny that I do tend to stick to one partner, but I have like explored in other ways. Like I've had a threesome before, or like other things like that. I one time um, had a short fling with a person who had a spouse in the military,
Mm.
and we all three sat down and said, "Hey, this is cool. She's gonna be here by herself. You know,
Mm-hmm.
y'all handle whatever you need to handle, have whatever you need to have." And he did the same while he was gone. So, that type of thing. So, I guess I've, I've done a lot more than what I'd be thinking I've done. But yeah, I consent, safety, communication. Um, I don't really want to be with someone. I don't prefer to be with someone who is um, not open to at least discussion
Mm-hmm.
about exploration of other things, because I think the sexual sides of ourselves evolve as much as our every other part of us does.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I might really like pizza today, but I don't know. Tomorrow I might not be feeling it. Like,
Yeah.
let's try some chicken. I don't know. So, I think we all have to be open to sex being just as open as everything else. Your diet, your
Mm-hmm.
your mental health, um, and that diet, because that's a thing too. What you consume mentally and emotionally and spiritually. And I think that sex is very spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I've learned. Like that exchanging of energies. Like I don't know. Have you ever like? It doesn't even have to be sexual, but mess with someone or like maybe kiss someone or like spent your time cultivating something with them only to feel like, why is this negative energy around me so much lately? Like, why?
Mm.
Like, and I was having a conversation with someone, and they were just saying, like, if you notice you're engaging with someone, no matter the degree of it, and you notice bad things just keep happening, you should reevaluate that new person or that new connection in your life.
Yeah.
Um, and when I was younger, sex was strictly physical.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and now it's about so much more. It transcends the physical. It's it. I think part of what makes it so alluring to me is that it is spiritual, and that I get that moment with that person, and you can't ever recreate that moment, and nobody else has that but you
Mm-hmm.
and the people or person involved. I think that's magical. Um, as long as we have a mutual respect for each other, I think that's super magical. But you're able to tell if you don't. Like, I think you have to demand that respect and that care that you're giving as well, and you have to seek your pleasure as well, because that's also a thing.
Yeah.
That's a big
A
thing.
big thing, because I will say that tying this from the beginning, my memories of like sex being introduced to me like from a young age, I will say that a lot of my sexual experiences, the majority of them are rooted in like self exploration and
Hmm.
seeking self pleasure, but not. I don't think I ever felt. If there was any shame about it, it was coming from an external source, like
Hmm.
other people, and like discovering that, oh, most people don't want to talk about their pleasure. So
Hmm.
we're just not going to talk about ours either. um,
Even the whole faking it so they can make it. I've done that. I'd be like,
yeah.
so it'll be over quicker. Like,
Mm.
like,
And I,
but now it's
yeah.
like, nah.
Yeah, and I will say, not that like people deserve, like, not that people are owed my sexual history or anything, but I will say that I have only had sex with one person.
Hmm.
So my sexual ethics doesn't necessarily match my sexual history. And I think that is an important to say that your sexual history doesn't necessarily have to match your like ethics, because
Yeah.
like things are evolving and changing. So I think so like in theory, yes, like I have like these set of ideals and ethics and things, but I think like my sexual history is a result of being brought up in a very contained like environment and contained way of thinking, a container of shame, a container of expectations. And I don't want to really get on this tangent, but I also am discovering that supremacy culture, and I think when we use the word supremacy, we think we're just talking about white supremacy
Yeah, but there's
or gender supremacy, but there's also like supremacy cultures that like infiltrate like our definition of beauty and inherent value. And I think growing up as someone who didn't have a body that like fit uh, a, a a presentation that fit like this mold of what is considered beautiful or sexy or desirable. So I think I really played up to that. Like those things became my reality. Like sometimes what you say or what is spoken over you becomes your reality.
yeah,
And so I began to believe that like because I didn't have the body that is considered to be sexy or desirable, that like I'm not desirable, and therefore like I don't deserve to be seeking after like desires, and I don't deserve for others to like pursue me in that way. And so I think that is why like my sexual history is very like bare and dull. Uh,
yeah,
and maybe dull isn't the right word, but just not fully developed. And I think there was a time where I would have celebrated that. I would have celebrated the fact that like, oh, I've only had sex with one person, and because if you have sex with a bunch of people, then you're a slut. And if you're a slut, you're a bad person. No. Um, Abra wants to be an ethical slut now. Um,
yes,
but Abra is still learning like how to shed and unlearn all of the things that hindered her from explore like just exploring. Um so yes, I do think that sex can be and is very spiritual. Um because of the exchange of energies, and I definitely think that my sexual experience with the person that I had sex with definitely ushered in a huge shift in my life. It basically was the catalyst of me coming out. It was the catalyst of me making these major life decisions in all areas of my life, not just the sexuality part, but everything. And so, yes, I think sex can has the ability to transform us, but it isn't just about the like sex act, but it's about like I said, the exchange of energies. And I'm grateful that my first sexual experience was with someone that I knew, and that there was a level of trust, there was like communication, before, during, and after. um
yeah,
I do remember crying After.
I did my first time for sure.
Because well, because it was liberating, but it was also scary because
Mm-hmm.
I realized in that moment that, like, I was idolizing, like, my virginity and the construct of virginity in and of itself, and I kind of had to grieve
That.
that part of me that was false. And realizing that my inherent worth, like, as a person, is not rooted in, like, that, but it's rooted in something much deeper. And I had to really, like, it challenged me in a sense because I realized in that moment that, like, me not having sex with anyone was, like, the last thing that I was holding on to, that for some reason I thought, like, oh, I'll be in good graces with God, because I've done so many other things. Like, I drink, I smoke, I've, participated in things that, your parents say don't do that. But the sex part was, like, the last thing that I was holding on to, that had this I had this one up of, like, purity over everybody else. And I also had to grieve, like, the sense of, like, man, me having that mentality kind of made me a little bit shitty. And, like, I had to reflect on, like, how I may have been perpetuating a narrative onto others that was harmful, or was perpetuating shame, um, instead of, like, really encompassing, like, choice and freedom and honor. Um, and that how very much legalistic I was in that way, even though I presented myself to be someone that wasn't, but I definitely was. And so I
I had a
cried.
purity ring.
I never had one of those. Um, because no.
Oh, it was like a ring that said faith that my mom bought me.
Mm,
That I decided to make a purity ring. I
wow.
was bullshitting.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I cried because I was like, well, now I have to let that side of me go, and now I have to face the reality of, like, the full me. And
Mm-hmm.
once you, like, accept the reality of yourself, then you have to, like, accept the fact that eventually you have to share that with the world, and you have to take up space in a different way. And that's really scary. But thankfully the
Yeah.
person that I had sex with, like, understood that, and they were very supportive. They were like, it's okay, girl, you're gonna make it. And shout out to Alicia because she'll probably next week I'll have her explain her side of it. But I do remember, I Alicia was actually one of the first people that I contacted after it happened, and I just remember her, like, laughing, but not in, like, a mean way, but just, like, this beautiful moment of, like, oh, Abra, like, it's a shit show now, but this is, like, changing you and transforming you, and, like, um there's, like, divine beauty coming out of this. And it was the catalyst of me, like, reclaiming self. And I didn't really see it then, but I see it now. And so I'm very thankful for that. Any last thoughts on sex?
Have it.
Have it.
Have it in abundance. Um, it's healthy, yo. I mean, and that's if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
Just like anything else, if you want to do it, do that shit and
Yes.
explore and find new things about yourself that you enjoy, and ask questions, have conversations like these with your friends.
Yeah.
Because that's super healthy too. And there are times where you feel isolated in your sexuality. So it's nice to have friends like Abra and Alicia that I can talk to about all of my sexual adventures and desires. No, but really though, yeah, talk about it.
Well, we'll move into Shameless Plug. Sorry I didn't prepare you for that. So, yeah. I just have two this week, and it is related to what we've been talking about. I wanted to plug Kevin Garcia. I think I've mentioned them on the podcast before, but if you don't know who Kevin Garcia is, get your life, honey, and go look them up. But I wanted to specifically highlight Kevin's Good Christian Sex series on YouTube. So Kevin's like going, it's got like a few episodes that just are specifically addressing like sex and sexual ethics, like, and like redefining like what good Christian sex is, that kind of goes outside of like that purity culture narrative that we're all tired of, and like centering like the queer experience. And yeah, I highly recommend you guys look that up. And then also he has a on YouTube, his talk or his workshop that was at the Q Christian conference, Let's Talk About Sexual Ethics, is on there too, on his YouTube channel. So I highly recommend everybody watch that, absorb the information, let it urge you to research more and more. And then a third thing about Kevin is Kevin just announced the Queerly Beloved Summer Camp, and I'm going to pull it up and read to you guys what it says. So what you do is, I will link the link on the episode description, where you can sign up for the mailing list so that you can get 10% off your registration when it goes live. But basically, it's a queer summer camp centering LGBTQ people of faith. And I'm just going to read what it says. There's a little blurb. It says, let's have the time of our lives. We know how to survive, but when are we actually thriving? When do we have the space or the time or the support to unwind, to de-stress, to heal, and maybe even have fun? And that's why we need Queer Summer Camp, a space for queer people of faith can engage, find healing through restorative practices, find community through intentional formation, and find space to be restored through good old-fashioned summer fun. So yeah, that's going to be a thing. So definitely be on the lookout for that. Get signed up for that mailing list so you can get updates and that 10% discount. I love Kevin. I love Kevin's work. Kevin has definitely been a vital resource for me since coming out, and even before then. Yes, just get plugged in. So I wanted to highlight that, and then I also wanted to plug Sex Positive Families LLC, which was founded by Melissa Prenter Carnegie, and she's a sex educator and licensed social worker. And basically, it's a consulting agency. They provide coaching and resources for families on how to have conversations about sex from a sex positive lens. So you can follow them on Instagram at sexpositive_families. And in their bio, you'll see the link tree where you can find their website and other resources. And I'll also link their website as well. So if you're a person that's a parent listening to this and you're like, okay, Abra, okay, Whitney, I hear you. We need to talk about sex more, but I don't know how. Um, sex positive families. There you go. Resources.
Hey.
And then on a personal note, my shameless plug is that I'm teaching Mystic Flow again on Monday, July 8th at 7 p.m. at National School of the Arts. So I hope to see all you lovelies there that are in Nashville. And that's all I have for shameless plug. Do you have anything, Whitney?
No, somebody just give me a job.
Seriously though, who's hiring?
Ooh,
Hit
who's
us up.
hiring? So, yeah, let us know.
Let us know.
That's all I need to plug.
And at this point, y'all should know where to find Whitney. But in case you don't, we will link all of her socials below so that you can slide in her DMs and be like, girl, this place is hiring. Here's that application. Here's that interview.
Yeah.
Yes. Please
Or just
slide.
talk to me about crazy stuff.
Yes. Slide in our DMs about other things.
Yeah.
But keep it, don't get crazy. Don't be thinking,
We just talked about ethics, y'all.
right. So keep your pictures to yourself. Um, unless I know you.
Then text it to me.
Right. Yeah. And I totally realized that we didn't talk about how our weekends were, but I just wanted to say that I had the most amazing weekend with Whitney, y'all.
It was incredible.
Like
The past 2 weekends.
2 weekends, because we were at Pride together last weekend, and then this past weekend, Whitney texts me and she's like, "Hey, I'm gonna be in Nashville. Hit me up later." And I honestly was kind of like, yeah, I'm gonna hit her up and maybe pop in for 20 minutes and then go home and do laundry and be responsible. That did not happen, y'all.
I had you out for 2 days.
Basically, when I got home, my parents were like, "Oh my god." But no, this past weekend was so good. We did so many spontaneous things. Ate such good food, good ice cream, met amazing people in the city, and it really was a testament that I need to get out more.
Me too.
And that I also need to it's I love that we were, a lot of where we were was very centered around black spaces, it was when we went to brunch. Shout out to Garden Brunch Cafe. Because when I tell you, I mean, I am always trying to support black businesses, but it was so beautiful to see just beautiful black people enjoying their Saturday with their mimosas and their omelets and their pancakes,
their potatoes and their grits.
Right. Because I think people think that when black people come together, it always has to be centered around the struggle. And it's just really good to see that spaces exist where we can just be without it having to be about oh, let's talk about the struggle of being black, or let's try to mobilize this and that. No, we're just being, we're just having our brunch, we're just having our mimosas. And I realized that that is not depicted enough in wider media and representation. So that was really beautiful. So
we'll definitely be back.
Yeah, I'll definitely be back. because those cheese grits were
So good.
so good. So good. Who needs sex when you have cheese grits?
I'm saying.
Like, sex is good,
What
but
makes
have you had cheese grits though?
Maybe cheese grits after sex.
Mmm. We should do an episode on sex and food.
There you go.
There we go. For another time. Well, guys, thanks for listening. Alicia will be back next week. So it just makes the heart grow fonder.
Yeah.
And hopefully Whitney will be back. I will go ahead and announce that Whitney is officially our third.
Yes.
She's the third in this relationship.
Whitney.
Whitney will be around a lot more. She's a recurring co-host. She won't be with us every week, but she's definitely going to be around, especially if Alicia or I are not able to be here to record. So she is officially part of Misfits and Mystics fam. Please bless her as she comes. We love Whitney so much. Thank you so much, Whitney, for popping in and doing this.
Love y'all.
We love you. Okay, guys, well, we'll see you next time. Hit us up on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. We love you. Oh, song of the week. I'm terrible. What is it? I didn't prepare a song because Alicia does that. Well, no song of the week. Oh no. Okay, I have the perfect one because you're here. If you're addicted to kissing and hugging, touching and rubbing, I'm a sucker for love, for love, for love, for love. If you're addicted to kissing and hugging, touching and rubbing, you're a sucker for love, for love, for love.
Oh my gosh, Danity Kane.
Danity Kane. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh man. We're obsessed with Danity Kane, so that
and making the band.
Go
watch it on YouTube,
please, and let us know how you feel.
There's my shameless plug.
There it is. That's the one. Cool, guys.
Watch Kevin Garcia and making the band the rest of the night.
Yep, that sounds like a plan. That's great. That's the best.
We want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. Continue the conversation with us. Develop a community with other misfits and mystics like us, and get your latest updates on Shameless Plugs and other news by following us on social media. We are on Instagram at Misfits and Mystics Pod, Twitter at Misfits Mystics, and we also have a Facebook page that you can like and share.
Want to reach us directly? Shoot us an email at misfitsandmysticspod@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you, and with your permission, we might give you a shout out on future episodes.
Don't forget to subscribe on whatever streaming service you're using to stay up to date on newest episodes being released.
Leave us a review on iTunes to help us gain more visibility. Plus, we appreciate the feedback.